Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. All right, raise your hand if this has ever happened to you, where you hit December and realize that the CME requirements for your license or your board certification or any similar thing is up for renewal and you don't have enough credits reported. This is a very common occurrence. And today we're going to tackle this. We're going to get in there and figure out how can we avoid that particular kind of end of the year panic. Last week, we talked about setting ourselves up for the rest of 2026, thinking ahead, trying to use up our CME, trying to use up our vacation time. Today, we're going to get a little deeper into how can we be more thoughtful about keeping up on CME and maintenance and certification and all those boring logistic things that we have to do, because generally speaking, no one does that for us. Now, let's break this up into a few different parts. The first thing we have to consider is what CME credits do you actually need and where do they need to go? Like what is actually needed? There are CME requirements for your state licensure, right? There are CME requirements that are required for your specialty boards. And if you, like me, are one of these folks who have more than one board certifications, then you've got multiple boards to report to. Similarly, you might have other things that are not quite board certifications, but require some ongoing CME reporting. So for example, the Menopause Society, I got my certification, I think in 2025, and it requires me to do a certain amount of CME every year, and a certain amount of that has to come directly from the Menopause Society. We could have a long discussion about all the money that is involved in, helping doctors keep up with their education. We're going to put that part aside. But first, we just want to be really clear. What are we actually responsible for reporting? Where does it need to go? And what are those deadlines? I'm hoping that we can come to a place where we make this a little bit less boring and perhaps a little bit more fun and thoughtful. But very first, we need to get those basics straight. So think about how many board certifications do you have and what are the requirements for maintaining that? How many state licenses do you have and what are the requirements for maintaining your CME records in order to maintain your state license? There might be other requirements that you have in terms of reporting to your employer. There could be some other things. Write it all down, or you can, of course, dictate it into software. We want it captured somewhere so that we can make it very clear to ourselves what is actually required. Who do I need to talk to about it, right? How do I need to report it? How does it get reported? Where can it go? Those details need to be very clear before we move on to something that hopefully will be a little bit more fun and creating a system so that we can make this easier. The whole point is trying to create a repeatable system so that you can get this stuff done and avoid the end of the year panic. So get it all out there. The next thing that I want us to think about is how you actually like to do your CME. This matters too, because of course the tactics are going to be a little bit different depending on, I'm going to say, how you like to do your CME and what types of CME might be required for you. As an outpatient family medicine doctor and board certified by the Obesity Medicine Association, I have pretty good leeway in terms of how I'm able to do the CME requirements and the maintenance certification, right? There are certain rules that I have to follow in terms of prescribed and elective credits. Um, but I have a lot of choice. I can do live activities, I can do some self-study activities, and I don't have to keep any kind of patient logs, right? If you're a surgeon, you might need to be keeping procedure logs of some kind to demonstrate that you've done an adequate number of cases, right? Let's be really clear on what those things are. And let's also think about within the choices you have, what do you like to do for your CME? Do you like to go to conferences, right? Like a big conference that is over 3 to 5 days. You may have very few options, or you might have a lot of different options for what those conferences are, right? There might be particular ones in your specialty, and maybe there's only one or two in the country, right? Or maybe internationally. And so you don't have a lot of choices. If you are in a primary care specialty, you might have a lot of different options. As a family medicine doc, right, I could go to the American Academy of Family Medicine. I could certainly go to anything for internal medicine or pediatrics. I might not have the prescribed credits doing that, but because so many things would be applicable to me, right, that gives me a lot of choice, which might actually be kind of a problem, right, because it might be hard to pick. But if you like to go to big conferences, we need to be clear on when generally they are, um, so that we can build that in as we are figuring out how do we make this a system. What are the things that need to happen if you're going to go to big conferences, right? They're going to be at a set time. You do often have the option now of going live or doing it online. Often you're going to need to travel, you're going to need to take time off of work, and you're going to need to request that way in advance, right? If there are more than one of you in your department as well, you may also have some issues in terms of, do you have to alternate because the whole department can't go to the one specialty conference, or are you all able to go? And it's just a given, right, that there's not going to be that subspecialty. I remember I was working with a woman who was gyn-onc, and there were two gyn-oncs in her hospital system. There was one gyn-onc conference that they wanted to go to, but they both were not allowed, right, to both go every year. And so there was this weird dynamic where it was kind of whoever put it in first. If you are facing that kind of a situation, I hope not, but you need to be aware of that, of how do I make sure that I hopefully fairly figure out if I get to go this year, request the time off, right? Make sure there's coverage. It's a whole thing, but it needs to be a part of the math that you do. There might be some live conferences you want to go to. Great. We need to set aside time for that in a certain way, right? Because you'll need to request time out. You'll need to often travel. But there are also a lot of other in-between sort of things that we now have access to. There are smaller things that you may need to do also for the place that you work. So keeping up with ACLS or PALS or whatever the emergency sort of life support type system is, right? Those might have a lot of options for your training. You might have to do it at the same day that everybody in your institution does it, right? So there's kind of a set thing, you just need to show up, but you do need to report it. There might be smaller sort of local things that you don't necessarily need to take that much time for, but you do need to be aware of them, and you do still need to probably request the time, or plan to be there if it's on a weekend, for example. We have a conference like that locally. And then let's also think about other types of CME activities. So there are a large number now of CME activities built into tools that you are using every day. Up to date, open evidence. If you read journals like New England Journal of Medicine or the American Family Physician Journal or AAP, right? There are ways that you can do weekly CMEs or monthly, depends on how frequently the journal comes out, or maybe when you look up questions, there are CME credits when you are logged into open evidence or up to date, right, that you can claim credit for because we are always learning. It's really important, though, that if you're going to use one of these things, that you have a regular cadence for making sure that you complete whatever requirements are within that activity. So, for example, if you're using up-to-date or open evidence, you have to complete a little tiny bit of questions related to, questions like in open evidence will be, does this pertain, this question that I've looked up, does it pertain to diagnosis or treatment? Am I going to change my management, or did this reinforce my practice, right? What were the key learnings? And then submit the credit. And then you'll get a transcript, right, that you can eventually take off to whatever you need to report to. If you aren't paying attention to that, though, and you're only seeing the CME credits sort of tick up, but you don't realize that you have to go back and answer those questions, one of the things that we need to start doing is setting aside a little bit of time that you can go back and answer the questions. It's not that difficult and it doesn't take that much time, but if you've never done that, you have to go in and do that. It is going to take you at least a couple minutes. And if you've got, let's say, 50 threads, right? Those little minutes stack up. And what I would like you to do is to figure out, what is a system that I can come to regularly so that all of this work that I'm already doing, all this education I'm already doing, can make sure I get credit for it. And I can do it in a way that is going to work for me. Now, when I'm using these point of care tools myself, when I'm using up to date or open evidence, I am with the patient a lot of the time. And I'm not going to stop and answer those questions right then and there in order to get the CME credit, because I'm with the patient. I'm trying to stay focused on the visit. You might decide that you want to do that flow differently, but this is why we're spending a little bit of time thinking about it. So what is the system that we can create where we come back to that so we make sure that we're getting credit? We don't wait until the very end of the year. We're going to talk about some ways that you might manage this, but what is the flow that is going to work the best for you? What are the other things that might be going on, though, that you might be getting credit for? So if you are reading one of the journals for your specialty, so again, for me, that would be the American Family Physician Journal, but I also get New England Journal, and I think I have to pay extra for the CME credits. But when I'm reading the articles, and my friends, I do not read all of them. There are a lot of them that are so incredibly non-relevant to me. But when there's something that's relevant to me and I read the article, right, I'm going to do the little quiz, right, and I'm going to do the little evaluation so that I generate the transcript. And that helps me to accumulate. Now, more and more of these tools are going to be able to be things that you can connect to your licensure in some way or your board certification, right? So that eventually, hopefully, the information that you did the CME will eventually automatically flow. I don't think that's in place in as many places as we would like it to be, but eventually that will be a thing. I think that there's some capacity for that in up to date for some states, that if you are completing the CME pathways in up to date, some states will allow it to automatically flow into the CME credits for your state licensure, right? So I would argue we need more and more of those systems, so long as they can be accurate. But for the meantime, most of us are going to have to still manually report. Okay, so now we have sort of seen a lot of the different things that we need to do in order to get the CME credit, to figure out where that needs to be reported? How do I make sure that I've earned the credit, right? I've completed the little questions and I've got a transcript. Well, now what? Or maybe we have a plan for, there's a few conferences that I go to, and it's always a struggle to remember to take the time off, or I'll go to the conference and then I get home and then I don't report the credit. And then at the end of the year, I'm trying to scramble and remember what it was that I did. What I would like us to do is to figure out, again, what is the system that is going to work best for me that I can start trying now. I've played around with a few different things, and some of these things work well, sometimes they don't, right? We are trying to see what will work best for us. And what I would argue is you might choose to do something that would be a little bit more fun for this very unsexy task by, for example, creating a quarterly date with yourself. A quarterly working date with yourself where you are not at work. Perhaps you take yourself to a nice coffee shop with your computer, and the goal that you have is maintaining the things that you need to do for your board certification, for your CME, for your licensure. That might be the time that you go in and answer the quarterly questions if that's part of your maintenance of certification. That's something that I have to do every quarter. I find it pretty easy to do. I have a little reminder that comes out at the beginning of each quarter when those questions are eligible. And I will do that in a way that allows it to be sort of quick and easy for me. And a lot of the time that's going to be setting aside time. I'm going to go to a coffee shop. I'm going to answer the questions, get it done at the beginning of the quarter. So it's not a scramble at the end. There's not a deadline. I've thought about it in advance, right? I've created a system that works. What else might you do, though? You might use some of that quarterly date time to request the time off, to register for the CMEs, maybe 6 to 9 months in advance, depending on when you need to put in your CME request time or your time off time. You might answer questions. You might do some of the journal articles, perhaps, that you need to read. You might find a system for charting or documenting, reminding yourself where are all those CME credits, going in, answering all the questions, and uploading those transcripts into the places that you need to report them. This is why we wanted to be very clear of what is the place that I need to report all those CMEs to. There might be one place that you're able to create the CME transcript. I know that's true in the family physicians. I can put all the CMEs into there. It will automatically flow through in the AFP. I don't know why those are different, but they are different. And to the American Board of Family Physicians, which is a different thing. That allows me to have one place that is a repository of all those CME credits. And I think that, I'm trying to remember, I don't think I have to go and separately report that to the state. I think it all just flows because I think it's all connected. But do have to make sure that it gets into the repository where all of that information is going to flow, right? So that is a great activity to do on that quarterly date where I've taken myself to a coffee shop. I'm sitting down with that information, right? I can pull the transcripts from the things that I've done recently. Some of it will flow automatically. The quarterly questions I don't have to worry about because that already talks to the system. But it's a dedicated time to go in and get that stuff done. Now, some of us are going to sit here and hear this and roll our eyes and think, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that kind of crap. I shouldn't have to do that. If that's you, I just want to normalize that resistance and recognize that we are incredibly busy, hardworking people, and we wish that some of these things were taken care of by someone else. Maybe somebody, our employer could do it. Um, Maybe back in the olden days, we might have had a secretary or a nurse do it. I am not sure. I am not old enough to know the answer to that. But if you find yourself wishing that somebody else would do this for you, I hear you. Now, could you pay someone else to do this for you? You probably could. And I don't know about them actually logging in as you and reporting it for you. They could probably fill out the manual forms so that you could turn it in, but you would still want to verify that information. The other kind of resistance that you may have is I shouldn't have to do all of this CME. I got into medical school. I completed residency. I completed fellowship. I completed the initial board certification. Why do I have to do all this? And if that's you, I want to come back to pausing us and saying that the practice of medicine is constantly evolving. And so I want you to pause for a minute and think about a medical provider of some kind that you've worked with who had out-of-date information. We do not want to be practicing with out-of-date information. That's one of the reasons why CME requirements are here. Medical information changes quite a bit. We want to be able to keep up. And although none of us may really love the system or, again, the money involved in maintaining our certification or licensure or those things, let's also just appreciate that we want to be up to date. We want to be practicing good medicine. We want to be well informed. And this is an imperfect mechanism for doing that. When CME conferences were first created, part of the idea was forcing the doctor to take a break and travel somewhere. A lot of the conferences would be like half of the day, right, to force them to spend vacation time in a beautiful place like, I don't know, Hawaii or Disneyland or something. Now, I can't verify all of that information, but you can see the idea behind it, right? Of forcing us to stop, even though there are patients to be seen, even though we could be at work, and spend some time updating our knowledge and being away from the day-to-day of doing the work in order to rest and accumulate knowledge and hopefully retain some of that knowledge. There are reasons why we have these requirements. They are a good idea. It would be lovely if somebody else would take on the burden of doing the work and documenting all of these things. But right now, that's not systemized in any way. And so we are going to need to spend some time figuring out what we need to do to get this done. It's okay if we have some resistance, but we're going to accept that it's just one of these things like paying taxes that we need to do. Ultimately, it serves a good purpose, right, in keeping us up to date and making sure that we are practicing good medicine as medicine evolves, making sure that when we are taking care of patients, we can stand behind our board certifications and say, listen, I'm, staying up to date in my specialty. I am keeping up with information. And these are the ways that I document that. I think we will see a lot of evolution over the next probably several years in ways that will be easier for us to continue to capture the data. In thinking about this topic, I was playing around with my AI scribe and I played around with, I tried Open Evidence and I tried Claude and tried to figure out, could I teach any of these tools to complete a form that I could send off for my board certification so that I didn't have to sit there and manually enter it into all the fields, either on the computer or on this PDF. And I actually could make it work using the dictation tool. And actually, no, I tried that. I tried the dictation tool in my Scribe, and it just put the information, it did get the information into the PDF, but it was kind of in a goofy format. And so scrapped that, and I gave it to Claude instead. And I said, here is the PDF. Here are 3 CME certificates. I want you to go in and add it in. Ask me questions, don't make anything up. And it actually was able to identify the information. It was able to put things in the correct field. It was able to let me know that it couldn't fill out every field in the form because I didn't give it all of the information. And it also noticed that one of the CME certificates that I gave it had been described as something that was automatically reported elsewhere and should not go into this PDF form. So it was able to recognize that I had given it a task which was not appropriate, and it let me know how it was handling that. I share this to say that I think we will continue to see that some of the administrative burden of these tasks may come down. But in the meantime, let's help our future selves out by figuring out a system so that we can come to this work regularly. There's no getting around the requirements for state licensure, maintaining your board certifications, and any other certifications that you want to retain the credentials for. There's just some requirements, and it's a lot of dumb documentation that we have to do. That's just the reality. So let's figure out, how can we make this easier? How can we do a little bit on a regular basis? So again, I would argue that spending some time quarterly, again, do something nice, take yourself to a coffee shop or sit outside somewhere, figure out a way to make it nice, to give some positive reinforcement, and help yourself out by coming to it regularly so we don't have that end of the year panic when you realize that none of your CME has been reported, that you have a million little question eval type things, that you never got the certificate over there from that conference. Let's make it easier and end the drama. So the biggest takeaways here are: 1, create some kind of a list or a document where you're capturing what are the things that I need to do to maintain state licensure, education requirements, CMEs, things like that. CMEs for your board certifications. Create a document. You could go to each of the websites that you have for those different things, right? And just dictate into some kind of tool what they are and have it create a document or an Excel sheet or something so that you can see very clearly what it is, what the deadlines are, and then use that to help figure out the system that you're going to use to keep this flowing. Figure out, what are you going to do in terms of maintaining? Are you going to do a quarterly date with yourself so that you can make sure that you have time set aside in order to schedule things, in order to answer the evaluation questions, in order to do quarterly questions or procedure logs, or whatever it is that you need to do? Let's figure out a time to do it so we're not scrambling, so that we're not trying to cram it into our already busy lives. We know we have these requirements. Let's treat it like part of our job. Make it easier. All right, my friends, don't forget, all of the time that you spend looking up questions is likely CME, and there's a little bit of work that you might need to do to answer some questions in order to count that, but it's work and education that you're already doing. So make sure that you capture that, send it off, get the credit. All of us need to get the credit for the work that we do, for the things that we learn. Let's keep it easier. All right, my friends, until next week, let's keep on keeping on. Take care. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.